Welcome back to the LocReady interview series with Miss Alums. I'm Connor, and today I'm speaking with Cody Cannell. Cody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I was just wondering, as we start out here, if you could briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little about what you do every day at work.
My name is Cody Cannell. Thank you for having me. I am the localization project manager for the ad studio team at Spotify. Quick shameless plug, we just launched ad studio in the French, German, and Italian speaking markets. So if anyone listening is interested in running ads through Spotify and those markets, hey, check it out. So since this is being recorded, I just want to make it super clear for the purposes of official communications that while I do speak directly about supporting translations at Facebook and Spotify throughout my experiences, at Facebook, I was a contractor, and I'm also a contractor at Spotify. So that means while I was at Facebook, I was technically an employee of IntraEdge. And at Spotify, I'm technically an employee of Yoconics. The lines between contingent workers, what we're called, and full-time employee can feel blurred, especially while working from home during this pandemic. I think for the purposes of official communication, it's very important that I manage the expectation that I am a contractor. So about what I do every day, the majority of my work is what you'd expect, just coordinating with stakeholders on the delivery timelines for assets needing translation for whatever project we're supporting. I also help advise stakeholders on the best path forward whenever they come to me with what if situations for localization related problems. And also, we're sort of working towards my involvement on discussions for content creation in English, because there's a lot of really beneficial choices that can be made with localization in mind on the front end when assets are being created in English. So that's in a nutshell what I do every day at Spotify.
Wow, you cover a lot, so that's great. How have your roles changed since you've moved from more of the project coordinator role at Facebook and Media Locate to the project manager role at Spotify? Sort of, have there been any big shifts going from that coordinator to a manager sort of position?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. So in terms of what I did at Media Locate, it was very wax on, wax off. It was an educational, informative experience for learning all about the execution of the localization process and the efforts involved in integrating feedback and maintaining the quality of translation memory tools. That being said, I think what may be more interesting to talk about is the differences in the scope of my responsibilities as a localization project coordinator on the team at Facebook and the scope of responsibilities for my job as a localization project manager at Spotify. And I want to first say that to use routine maybe doesn't really accurately describe my work that I did at Facebook or Spotify, because it's really so fast paced and completely dependent on whatever projects were on my plate at that time. And it's different issues require different solutions. The process can stay the same, but then I'm also sort of thinking about how can I optimize processes. And so there is no really set routine. That being said, at Facebook, despite having the title of project coordinator, I was attending kickoff meetings for large programs with high visibility. I was advising on potential pitfalls in the project lifecycle for, as I said, content created in English. They were wondering, well, what if I did this? How will that affect localization? And that is something I would advise on. And I would also sort of act as a resource of knowledge internally for what happens when stuff is kicked off for translation, and what are some ways that we can mitigate these common causes for delays. And this was all sort of captured in these educational presentations that I put together for the different teams that I engaged with as a translations POC. I was sort of like an island, the only localization person, and then everyone else that I interacted with at Facebook, they were content creators. And so each different type of content that they created had its own nuanced process and also its own respective set of nuance issues that needed education. On top of that, okay, so for Spotify, it's still advising stakeholders on the fastest path forward and advising on the localization process. But I would say that the biggest difference between what I did at Facebook and what I'm doing at Spotify is that I have greater influence on the process. So at Facebook, I was basically given a list of deliverables and a timeline that it had to happen in, and it was my job to execute. That was it. Whereas at Spotify, it's very interesting. I get to be involved in creating the overall production schedule, and my perspective is sort of factored into how much time overall is baked in to what is needed for localization, and I would say that's the biggest difference between project coordinator and project manager, is the extent to which I can influence the overall approach to localization of whatever projects I'm supporting, and then also the extent to which I can argue for timelines. And because we always need more time in localization, but the challenge is convincing the stakeholders to allocate that time. And as a project manager, I'm actually sort of given that voice to influence the process, whereas a project coordinator, that was not really the case.
Hmm. Oh, so it sounds like you definitely have a lot more say now, and you said that there's always more time needed. That kind of
Mhm.
leads into my next question of that I often hear that the role of the localization PM is to always put out fires, and that's sort of your
Mhm.
main job. And I was wondering if that's something, a general sentiment that you agree with, and if so, if you have some examples, and if not, sort of how do you prevent those emergencies from happening beforehand?
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. So yes, and perhaps this is maybe even a misconception that project managers, our job is to put out fires, and maybe this is cliche, but I think a good project manager should prevent fires from breaking out in the first place.
Mm.
Unfortunately, across the board, and this is not drawing uniquely from my experience at Facebook or Spotify or Media Locate. Across all large global organizations, there's a constant need for stakeholder education. For localization best practices. And you will find that in a lot of these fast-paced client-side teams, you'll be tasked with sort of convincing stakeholders why they should allocate enough time for you to do this right. To execute localization right in accordance with best practices. And I think that in your coursework at MIS, we're kind of empowered with this information, but we don't realize the uphill battle that it will take once you get into that client side job to really win folks over and to allow them, or to allow enough time to operate in accordance with localization best practices in a scalable way.
Mm.
The reality is that on the client side, and you are working with tons of extremely talented, intelligent people who are extraordinary problem solvers. And I think the challenge that we face as localizers is really convincing these extremely intelligent people that our prescribed method to solving this problem is better than whatever they came up with originally. And learning how to message that without alienating stakeholders or causing internal frustrations is transparently a skill that I'm still learning to refine. And I think that it's almost equally critical to have a good command of how you message your arguments. It's equally as critical to have that strong command as it is to have a firm domain knowledge in localization of these recommendations that you're giving.
Okay, so it sounds like those interpersonal skills are absolutely critical in your role. Um,
Absolutely.
that's good to hear. And sort of beyond that, building on those interpersonal skills, what sort of hard skills do students need to be successful in a role that the roles that you hold currently, or just in the localization industry as a whole? Have you noticed there's any sort of talent gaps in the industry, or is it hard to recruit people with certain attributes or skills or elements? And how can we as students prepare and build up those skills?
Excellent questions. So interpersonal communication skills, absolutely, that's super critical. I mean, it's critical in any job that you do, but especially in localization for the reasons that I stated in my response earlier, and that you're tasked with convincing folks why their approach is not necessarily the best way and why yours is. And you know, basically saying, hey, listen to me, but do it in a way that is you know, going to be harmonious. And it's sort of learning how to advocate for those best practices while introducing as little change as possible to the processes that already exist. And so that's quite difficult. And so I would say communication, just general analytical problem solving skills, like learning how to, you know, take note of these are the knowns in the equation, and then take note of these are the unknowns, and you know, learning how to use that to create a business case, to convince stakeholders to buy into whatever recommendation you are giving. And so yeah, communication, problem solving skills, and then hard skills, I think is particularly hard skills that you can learn while you're at MIS. I think in the roles that I have done, the most useful coursework was website localization and multilingual desktop publishing. As you're all familiar with, I think the common path for a career path for localization project managers is that you will do like 3 to 5 years on the vendor side to get a really thorough understanding of execution. And then you will transition to the client side roles at, you know, I don't know, Facebook, Google, Spotify, something like that. And you'll influence more of the strategy. Well, I would suggest that there is another, maybe less traditional path, and that's in contract roles, like the contract roles that I've done at Facebook and doing at Spotify. And what's interesting is it's kind of a blend of execution and strategy. And of course, I am given tasks that I need to complete that are related to localization, like making sure deliveries from our vendors look good. And if there's like broken links or missing things, being able to go into these like InDesign files or Photoshop files or things like that, and easily being able to swap out links, or maybe there is a UI screenshot that needs to be swapped out on an InDesign file, and really knowing how to not get bogged down in layers and things like that you learn about in the desktop publishing course. I think that's critical. And so in terms of hard skills, I think being able to work within creative design tools, being able to effectively navigate a CMS, because in a lot of problems that I would solve in both the role at Facebook and at Spotify are sort of revolving around finding the fastest path forward to getting content that lives in a CMS into a state that's acceptable to be rolled out live. And you really need to have a firm understanding of the fundamental concepts that Max teaches in the website localization course. And I will say that I've gone back and flipped through some of my notes from DTP and website localization to help facilitate decisions and recommendations that I have to do at my job at Spotify and the job that I did at Facebook.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm sure Max would be really happy to hear that. And I really like the line you said, that to do it in a way that's harmonious, carrying out localization in a way that's harmonious. I think that's a really good line. And then this next question sort of tacks on to the last one, so it doesn't need a super long response or anything, but sort of what are some helpful resources or ways for fresh graduates to improve their capabilities and visibility in the market? Maybe some online learning platforms, something of that nature.
Yeah, and so unsurprisingly, LinkedIn, I would say, is the best place to start. What I did to sort of get to where I am is I looked up folks that were in positions that I wanted to be in, and I took very close I paid very close attention to how they marketed their skills, which are the skills you are learning at MIS.
Mm.
And I sort of tailored my own personal branding to mirror what I saw. And I don't know, like some global program strategy manager at Google, what are they doing, and how are they marketing themselves? And so I sort of looked at that, and then I also took very close notes on job descriptions for jobs that I wanted and the skills that they were asking for. That is where I started my search. Okay, what are these marketable skills that folks are looking for? They're listed in this job on this job description, and I would make sure that that was very clear on my resume that I had those skills. And then I also made sure that my LinkedIn profile mentioned the skills that these roles required. And then on top of that, I think that just learning how to speak the language of, not only localization folks, but folks that work in a large enterprise in general. I'll give one quick story here. When I was interviewing for my role at Spotify, I was trying so hard to market myself as someone who is not entry level. And I was doing so well until like the last question, and the interviewer asked me, well, okay, so what is an OKR? What? I didn't know what an OKR was, and I looked it up after the fact, and it's objectives and key results. And of course, when you spell the word out, it makes total sense and it's self-explanatory. But not recognizing that extremely common acronym sort of revealed that I was not as involved in business critical strategic conversations as I perhaps would have liked to market myself to have been. And so just not only knowing those key acronyms and terms that localize your issues, but then also doing a bit of research and understanding how folks speak to each other within the context of a large enterprise. I think that's critical and would take you a long way in job interviews.
Okay, so learn how to sort of market yourself, sort of see how everybody else is doing it, and then really learn that industry lingo.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of other languages, do you speak any other languages beside English, and how have those helped you in the workplace? I know a lot of MIS students have B and even C languages.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of how have those helped you in your career?
Yeah, great question. So my B language is Chinese, and my C language is Japanese.
Nice.
And yeah, they definitely have helped me build value in all of the roles that I have done. Just drawing an example from the work that I did at Facebook. At a company as large as Facebook, we are translating at such a massive scale. There's we were looking for ways to sort of templatize our approach, or maybe to cut out manual steps of the translation process. And I think one good example in particular was that we had this giant InDesign file that was due to be packaged and delivered to our stakeholders like 8 hours in the future. And at that point, we realized that unfortunately, there was a string in the InDesign file and the traditional Chinese InDesign file that needed to be replaced. And no one on the team felt comfortable doing it. They couldn't read Chinese. And I was there and I was like, hey, I feel comfortable going into this file and identifying the string and swapping it out. And I was even able to, determine what font we were using, and it looked great. And it really wasn't something that we had to delay a delivery by an entire business day to wait for someone from the APAC office to help us with. And so I was able to save the day, so to speak, by knowing Chinese. And one other example I will say is that, as I said, we are looking for ways to sort of make the process as lightweight as possible. And I know that we all are taught how to work with SRT files and adding subtitles to videos, and the process of localizing those. And oftentimes videos for accessibility purposes will require a transcript. And a very common workaround is just take that SRT file and convert it to a text file or something. And then there's your transcript. That totally works for locales like French and German, things like that, where the way that subtitles are punctuated follows the same rules that they would in any other form of text. Well, when I was validating this workaround to where we could, just convert SRT to transcripts, I noticed that in Japanese, there were missing commas and periods and other very critical punctuation marks. And I looked it up and I'm like, hey, this is really weird. Are our SRTs wrong? And I did some research and found out that it's just because they don't really include commas and periods in subtitles for the CJK languages. And so I was able to sort of flag to the team, hey, the CJK SRTs definitely cannot be directly converted, and they need some more love before we can package them and deliver to our stakeholders. And that also sort of helped us save the day, because we would not have found out that the transcripts were not usable until they were externally facing, and a user would have to report unprofessional translations, which if you are the translations POC who is responsible for that product, you don't want that. Mm-hmm. And so it's good to be able to use your foreign language skills to sort of build value and prevent those fires from breaking out.
That's great. So you're definitely able to swoop in and save the day with your extra language abilities. I think that's good to hear. And
sometimes, yeah.
sometimes. Well, that's good. And I just have one last question for you. Looking back on how you got to where you are today, is there anything you wish you had done differently, or maybe you had wished you'd known before? And any advice for people like me or my fellow classmates that are just starting grad school or about to graduate?
Yeah. So, well, I guess I can give a little bit of background on sort of my very unique path. Is that I did the first year of the TLM program T-Track. I thought I wanted to be a project manager with the ability to translate in my back pocket when I got tired of commuting to the office every day, so I could work from home as a translator. And then our realities just shifted because of COVID. And before that, actually, I was offered an opportunity to go work as a contractor at Facebook, but it required me to leave my degree early and go on a leave of absence. And I thought I was like really potentially making a huge mistake by leaving the program halfway through to work a contract and then to come back, because we all know that a lot of the value in going to MIS is that critical network that you build. And I was sort of afraid that I was messing up those connections. And well, COVID happened, and then I found myself with a job that withstood an economic crisis. So that was a blessing in disguise, and I had no idea, that was going to happen. And then too, the connections were maintained, and so that was sort of a unfounded worry. And I've been able to make even more connections in my professional life, and so. Advice I would give to students who are in grad school currently is definitely try to pay attention to the problems that arise when you're doing your internships, because that will sort of help contextualize all of these lessons that the professors are communicating in the coursework. Because when I was doing the first year of coursework, of course, the practical knowledge was very useful, but I sort of lacked that context of actually operating in a business setting as a localization POC. And so now that I've got about 2 years of doing that under my belt, it's so like all the advice makes so much more sense, and I'm that much more excited to clear through the remaining coursework, because I know I'll get that much more out of it having that critical experience to contextualize the lessons that are trying to be taught. And so just really get the most out of your internship by paying attention to how best practices are being applied. On the vendor side, I mean, there's no question about it that people are following best practices, I think ISO standards and all. And so really like just acknowledge how people are sort of maybe taking what seems like an unnecessarily cumbersome path and understand why behind it, and be able to internalize that. And so just be keenly aware of how things can go wrong and the benefit of following best practices. And I think that you'll get that and the knowledge that you learn at MIS and through your internships. And yeah, just focus on that, be able to internalize it so that when you get to client side roles, you can communicate in the most effective way possible and hopefully have an easy time at getting that stakeholder buy-in to follow best practices.
That sounds so awesome. That all just came together at the very end and sounds perfect. All those lessons really build on each other. So I think everybody at Miss can really learn a lot from your story, and we all really appreciate your time, Cody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Connor. Yeah, it was a pleasure to share my experience with you guys.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
You too.